Hello and welcome back to Shreviews. A lot of you noticed an issue with my last video where the audio and video were not in sync. That was definitely not on purpose. That was not supposed to happen. It wasn't some artistic flair or something that I added to make it cinematic. Technical difficulties are a common part of video production, especially for me. I don't have any formal training in videography, nor do I have any fancy equipment. I just record using my phone. But this time, it was a bit different. This time, neither my software on my computer nor my hardware were trying to cooperate with me in any way. The software was choppy and kept freezing on me, despite trying all the different tricks like pre-rendering the video and trying to optimize and all of these other things that I read on the different forums online. Not to mention that the hardware side of things, where my computer is a bit old. It's about 4 years old. And I built it primarily for gaming. I built my own PC in 2016. I blogged about it on my website, shreviews.com. Go check it out. But it really started hitting the limits of its capabilities. And it has been doing that ever since I am using it for video production. Now this PC that I built 4 years ago, I've been using it primarily for gaming and of course for PowerPoint presentations and for spreadsheets and stuff like that for the past few years without any issues. It has kept up with that workload, and when I started building it, when I thought about the parts and so on, I had not thought about video production at all at that point. So I'm not frustrated by the fact that it struggles with this different workload that I'm putting on it, and I'm also not frustrated by the apparent obsolescence of my computer. That's just the name of the game. Every few years new parts come out and your current one just gets obsolete. That's just the way it goes. But in fact, the opposite happened this time. It helped me rediscover a feeling that I have not felt in a long time, and that's the feeling that's known to so many kids in middle-class families who grew up playing computer games in India. And that's the joy that you get from getting something to work on a hopelessly feeble PC. I say that this is a shared experience with some amount of confidence because I knew a lot of kids who were in the same boat as me when I was in school. We were all trying to get our hands on the latest games, and we had to usually, more often than not, settle for sort of bargain bin titles that were marked down in price, that were years or maybe even decades old most of the time. And even when we did get our hands on the latest and greatest, there was always the question of how we would even get those games to run on our computers that we had at home. You see, gaming in general was, and to some extent still is, a luxurious and expensive hobby to pursue in India. Enthusiast level hardware is super expensive, and what's considered even consumer level stuff in the Western world can still be extremely pricey. Now, as I kept thinking about this, I started uncovering even more older memories. I remember begging my parents for an Xbox 360 when it first released, and I saw ads plastered all across the neighborhood mall and on TV. I remember Akshay Kumar was in an ad for it once. I remember going to these gaming centered cyber cafes and gawking at the PCs which had 1 gigabyte of RAM and flat screen monitors at that point. This was early 2000s, so 2004, 2005-ish, that kind of an era. The computer that I had at home was a Pentium 4 system with 256 megabytes of RAM that got upgraded to 512 a few years after it was built. The computer was built in 2002, and I think towards several years after that, we finally got an upgrade after months and months of pestering my dad about it. And compared to the ones that were in the cyber cafe, my computer was positively ancient. I also remember the look of horror on my mother's eyes when she took me to one of these gaming cafes that I talked about, and she saw in horror that, these bunch of zombified looking guys just staring at their computer and playing Counter-Strike 1.6 in a seedy, sort of dimly lit room that had sort of musty odor, and there was this occasional expletives being hurled at each other because they were playing against one another in teams. just a whole bunch of these old memories that come up. Let me know if you'd like me to just have a longer form video about these old memories of gaming in the early 2000s in India in particular. That very niche thing, but I'd like to know your thoughts. Let me know in the comments. What were your memories of growing up and video games? But even if games were more affordable and hardware was more affordable, I still have a feeling that kids would be bereft of video game induced joy, because even if you can afford video games, your parents still have to let you play them in the first place. Now, I don't know about parents these days, if they're a lot more tech savvy and open to these things, but my parents definitely thought that video games were unproductive, a waste of time, and in the case of my mom, she thought it was tantamount to gambling. She made that connection from the CD gaming den that I mentioned earlier. But despite all of these obstacles and limitations, we still found ways to find games and make them work on our computers, whether it be by cranking the settings down to the lowest possible setting or even messing around in configuration files. The end result was usually blurry and a pixelated mess with missing textures and all sorts of weird glitches. I remember playing BioShock Infinite with almost no textures available to me. Half of the things were just blank or just black. I still played it though. It was still a good game, I would say. I also vividly remember playing GTA 4. This is a game that is notorious for its terrible optimization on the PC platform, and I got it to run at about 21 to 24 frames per second, and I played through it twice with that. In the end, the experience of the game wasn't limited to the game itself, but it was the entire experience, buying the game, getting it to install, trying to get it to work, running it at a frame rate that was not a slideshow, talking about it with your friends, nerding out about it, really wringing out each and every last drop of enjoyment out of each and every game that we got our hands on. I would argue that even video games were so looked down upon during that time, at least from the older generation, that added to the enjoyment. Like, we fancied ourselves to be rebels engaging in an underground activity. This is, again, I said early 2000s. The gaming, at least in India, was only starting to grow out of being an underground subculture. It didn't have the widespread mainstream appeal that it has now. I remember there was one show on a TV channel called Star One where they played Counter-Strike. I think Rahul Dev was the host, and it was a really weird experiment that they tried, but it didn't catch fire or didn't become viral at that time. Also remember the Nokia N-Gage, that was also pretty much a failure, but I digress. Again, memories, let me know in the comments. Now fast forward from 2000s to 2010s and now 2020, gaming is pretty commonplace. At least in India, I know the smartphone has taken over as the device of choice when it comes to gaming, whether it be Candy Crush or whether it be PUBG. That's banned in India now, but the variants of that kind of genre of games. In my case, I was able to build a PC after years and years of dreaming about it. Seriously, I am extremely lucky to have access to, in that time at least, a parts store where I got to see shelves stacked with parts and components, and you can just pick one out like a department store with just PC parts. It was an extremely, dare I say, a spiritual experience for me, because just the years of dreaming about that kind of thing, I couldn't even fathom that as a kid. All we had maybe in India was Lamington Road, but that was still kind of, I remember going there a few years back, and it still kind of felt not even close to the experience of building a PC by myself that I had in when I moved here to the US. But in a way, building the PC, and now it's all just digital downloads. I have Steam, or there's some other ways you can download games online, like Epic Game Store. I don't have that one, but mainly let's say Steam. That took away that whole challenge of getting a game to work and the weird sense of pride and accomplishment that came with it. And that's why when I started encountering this choppy and unresponsive UI on the video software that I'm using, I could hear the computer's fans spinning up and just having a high-pitched whiny noise. All those memories of the old days of when I had to struggle to play video games, that all came back to me. Let me know what you thought about this walk through old memories, the memories of a uniquely Indian PC experience. Did you have a similar experience? Were you one of the lucky ones who were able to just buy a fancy gaming PC back in the day and you had no issues whatsoever with these things? Did you have a console? I remember I had an Atari 2600 that I tried a few times, but then it wouldn't work with the newer HD TVs, so it's sort of collecting dust in a closet somewhere. What were your memories with when it comes to PCs, building and all of these things? I'd love to know your thoughts on this. Thank you for watching, and remember, there is no I in team, but there is an I in profit. I'll see you next time.